Yeah, welcome everyone to our webinar on AI governance in financial institutions. Today we will extend the view a bit and look a bit closer on the element of collaboration related to risk management in financial institutions in particular, but also in general. So basically we'll try to expand the concept of risk management to something called collaborative risk management when it comes to AI and machine learning. Yeah. So what we're going to do today is, first of all, I will walk you through a couple of background motivations. So why is this now important to consider? Why are we actually talking about collaborative risk management, which is for most people in the industry probably a new term? We will then look a bit upon what could we actually do to reach that goal. And then my colleague Rasmus will show you in a demonstration how that could look in practice, basically. And then we'll close up with some Q&A at the end. So why do we talk about GRCs or governance, risk and compliance for AI? Why is collaborative risk management in this area especially important? For this, we will like to refer to a couple of studies that were recently shared in the industry. Yeah. So one is, first of all, that the introduction of machine learning creates certain constraints that could be large, medium, or small constraints. But basically, what you'll see here is that if you see there is a lack of clarity on existing sectoral regulations. So that's most people that say that this is potentially limiting the development. Existing sector regulations, there are specific ones. You might know some from your country, from Denmark, for example. The UK has some, or Germany. There are new regulations coming up specifically related to AI and machine learning that need to be taken into account and that might to some extent overlap with existing sectoral regulations. And then we have the lack of algorithms with other regulation standards that we need to take into account. Could be related to personal identifiable information. That could be related to some general standards in terms of facial recognition or whatever one might consider implementing in the institution. So, and 47% of the respondents of a study here from the Bank of England that this is based on said that there are regulations that constrain their ML development. So it is very important to look at governance in related to that to keep on going and not be left behind. So another study that we found says that 62% having developed governance frameworks. So governance frameworks are becoming more and more important actually to overcome this lag or this slow development. 47% here of this study have differentiated risk management framework specifically for this, and 39% have begun to complement risk mitigation tools. So you see that the more and more concrete the organizations get, the less are actually doing that. But it is obviously very important to become concrete. And in order to be that, one needs to involve a couple of different stakeholders. And here the collaborative element comes in, because you might all know the first, second, third line of defense that you'll typically run in financial institutions. This is probably also a good role model to look at if you are not currently working in a financial institution. So looking at that, we'll see different kind of stakeholders. I would like to focus here now on the central circle here, to the team level, or really on the narrow organizational level. And there we'll see already that when we talk about AI machine learning, there are different people. There's product management or project management. There are the developers, the data scientists, obviously, but also certain people handling the data. There are risk managers involved. And that's what we typically see on the first line of defense. So it's very important that we are then able to collect the required information, collect it immutable, and then make it available to the second line of defense. So that will be typically a central risk management unit that likes to oversee the whole the whole portfolio of models running in an institution, and potentially in some cases even involve the third level of defense, which might be then an external auditing firm that would like to certify certain things. So that's basically what we see happening there. And because of the complexity, the communication between these different levels that were historically more siloed becomes more and more crucial. So now I would like to a bit link this to what we presented last time in this webinar series. Those of you who have been there and might remember some of the slides or the general concept, and you'll like to talk about collaborating to achieve ethical solutions in a complex GRC setting. So if you might remember, those of you who were there are certain elements that make an AI system. And there is, to begin with, the data element that everyone starts out with. And related to the data, you have certain personas dealing with that, certain stakeholders. That could be the data engineer or the data owner. It could be also already a project manager that kind of sets out on the project to explore the data, to maybe process it in a way. But it could be also a risk-related person that looks related to GDPR-related issues, etc. So there are at least two personas to take care of, if not three or four. Now, if we look on the development, on the model, the data scientist comes into place, or the model developer, the quant, whatever one would label them. And there might be maybe even multiple of them, but one specific persona that will need to add it. If we then move away from just a single model, we'll productionize it, we'll run it in a production environment, then we'll see typically that there will be some sort of machine learning engineer. There might be a product owner in the end in the organization, but also a risk manager that once this model becomes embedded into a system needs to review that. And we have, of course, the business owner on the side who uses that and who needs to be informed related certain risk elements of this model. So in total, we could say we can add at least three different personas here. And now we will, as we did the last time with, we have not just one system, we have multiple systems we need to watch out for. And obviously that will also multiply the number of personas with the number of these systems. And sometimes personas might be the same, sometimes it might be different ones. So there are a lot of people involved that need to be taken care of and that need to be informed ongoing. So how to now solve that puzzle? So now I would like to bring up a suggestion for a collaborative AI risk management solution. And the first one is to look at the original process that one would typically go through when developing a model. So typically, you will have this AI model process where you go from preparing the data, developing it, building or registering that model, and so forth. Now, with collaborative risk management, there are certain additional elements here highlighted in orange that you need to add. And the first is usually creating some sort of project, defining that, and with that also assessing that. So basically defining how high is the risk of that project. What is the project gonna do? And that might set the requirements for all kind of additional governance elements that needs to be applied. Then going in parallel to this development process, one needs to perform certain things. That could be assessing the model, that could be collecting certain metadata, meaning, for example, performance metrics, and that will then lead to a certification of the model. Now, it's very important that this is done immutable, so one can always go back and have a digital trace or kind of an event log of this, so that if one, for example, wants to involve second or third level of defense, one can actually have that documentation without anyone changing that over time. This certification can then also be used to inform other stakeholders, for example, the model deployer or the machine learning engineer, that the model is actually ready for deployment, and then bring it into deployment and so forth. So if one comes to the usage, then there would be an automated monitoring that can be controlled by setting up certain standards, so one can continuously control that the model lives up to, for example, the accuracy level or F1 score level that is set out by the organization in that particular use case. Yeah, and that being said, now we could basically take these governance elements you saw there in a horizontal process and say, okay, we have continuous retraining, we have probably something that looks more like such a circle, and around that circle we can place again a couple of the personas we had before. So there would be obviously the data scientist, there would be IT operations and security when running the model, there would be risk management, both on a project level, but most certainly also on a model portfolio level. But there will be also external auditors that could potentially be involved. We have done a couple of pilots related to that. So that's, I think, also very interesting development we'll see in the industry. Yeah, and with that being said, so how to manage such workflows? Let's leave the theory a little. Let's get into the practice, and for that, I would like to hand over to my colleague Rasmus.
Thank you very much, Björn. So thank you for the great presentation here. So what I will take you through today is basically a little bit of a flow of the kind of things that you would want to go through in the process. So basically, what I'll talk to you about today will be how to set up and organize your models, how to set up your controls, and also selecting the necessary frameworks that you need to apply into your projects and your models, and then to run this with monitoring and continuous improvement. And finally, I'll show you also how to generate these reports and how to sort of keep certifying these models once they are deployed. So basically, what I need to say first is that what I will show you now is basically a small demo of a very narrow area of the platform capabilities that we have. So basically, the part that goes through this governance process. And I think the important message here is to really be able to, in order to do collaborative risk management across your organization, you need to have this common vocabulary, this common way of talking to each other. And one of those areas is the assessments, is the controls that create sort of a binding between the risk management groups, the data scientists, and the quants. So let's get through it. So basically, what it really revolves around is the start is to really select the kinds of frameworks that you want to employ within your organization. Now, some of these frameworks could be frameworks within the IOPA, for example. So in this case, in the platform, you can go in here, you can simply select the frameworks, and then you can read more about how these frameworks works and how they can be applied to individual projects and how they can be applied to individual models. Now, once this is applied, then it's actually read into the platform and the project, and then you can run these assessments, but you can also just go in and modify them. What we experience a lot with our clients is that there's a lot of a need to modify and to adjust these individual assessments to fit the need in the organization. It might be that you're in a big or large organization. It might be that there are certain models that you need to take care of in terms of governance, but the platform comes pre-configured with that. Now, basically, once you've done that, then it's just a question of going in, going through these assessments, and then basically, which is basic questions, answers. And I think there's a couple of dimensions here. There's the dimension of the assessment itself. There's a dimension of the users. There's a dimension of the phases in the project. As Björn showed you before, you go through multiple phases when developing and deploying a machine learning model. And you take all of these into account, and then you create these kinds of reports that sort of describe the overall compliance status. The other part is obviously that you can then go in afterwards and do specific compliance checks for specific models, for specific projects. And when you do these compliance checks, then what they really do is that they go out and they look at these questions, but they also look at any computational indicators that have been collected from external systems, third-party systems, and that generates another report, which basically shows you what is the overall compliance status for this. And that really comes together when you're sort of certifying the models in the end, when you're trying to deploy these models, and when you're trying to operate them in production, where you see that there is a certain, you get a certain feedback in the type of models when you deploy them. So that was what I wanted to say today, and I'll leave you with that for now. If you have any questions, just please ask away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rasmus. And with that being said, we're close to the end of what we presented here. So what you basically got to know today were, first of all, an outlook of what is moving in the market, how relevant do other organizations see this topic, and that could potentially trigger more and more development in the future. We gave an outlook on what is actually relevant, why is the collaborative element in risk management related to AI so important, and in the end, we showed you, a high-level demonstration of what could be actually done in order to achieve such a collaborative risk management related to AI governance. And with that being said, let's open the floor for questions. Yeah. So what kind of new potential AI risks will be important to mitigate for in the coming years? So, I mean, I'll maybe take it. First of all, I think this is more like a question regarding the outlook, and that's obviously a little difficult to do now. So also we don't know exactly what kind of risk will come up next year. So what I can say is that looking at the EU AI, looking at other regulations, we'll see, for example, coming up from the BaFin in Germany, and so is that there will be more and more models coming up in financial institutions, being a little different than what we saw in the past with the traditional credit rating models. And that obviously can create new risks, new situations that one needs to cater for, which means that the framework that you need to apply is actually very important, that it's flexible enough. What actually is now coming, I think that's more a question we'll need to ask that the regulators themselves, but what they need to want to govern, basically.
Then
There are no more questions. Then I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and see you next time.